Okay. Let's start from the Mishnah again. So, like we said, a Nazir is prohibited not just from wine, but also from grape products. Let's say somebody says, "Hareini Nazir min hachatzanim umin hazagin umin hatagalachas umin hatuma." So he chooses one item to prohibit himself. Either it's going to be from grape seeds, grape peels, cutting his hair, or from becoming tummy. Harei Nazir. They called it Tractate Nazir Olav. So he becomes a full-fledged Nazir, and he's prohibited with all the standard prohibitions of Nazir. Okay. Says the Gemara, Masnisin Deloit Reb Shimon. Our mission is clearly not like the opinion of Reb Shimon. In Tanya we learned, Reb Shimon Aimer, Eina Chayev Ad Sheyidur Mikulam. Reb Shimon says you're required, you are, when you become a Nazir, you have to become a Nazir from all the items. Becoming a Nazir just by prohibiting yourself from shaving your hair does not make you into a Nazir. For Rabbanan Amri, Afilu Nazar Ela B'chad Minhain have a Nazir. Even if a person only prohibits himself a single prohibition of Nazir, he becomes a regular Nazir. So obviously, what's the debate here between Reb Shimon and the Rabbanan? The question is whether or not a single, if you ban yourself from one of the many of the three main prohibitions of Nazir, not just of the three, but even from a specific of the three. For example, the prohibition of wine includes wine, it includes peels, and it includes seeds. So even if you prohibit yourself from one of those items, you're still a valid Nazir. So the Gemara wants to know what's the source for each opinion. My time with Reb Shimon. What's the reason of Reb Shimon? Amakra, the pasuk says, "Mikol asher ye'osa migefen hayayin mechatzanim ba'adzog." The verse says anything that comes from grape, whether it's wine to peels or seeds, it's all you're prohibited in all of them. But mikol implies that you have to accept every single variety. So Reb Shimon here is arguing that Naziris doesn't work unless you have mikol. You accept everything that goes into becoming a Nazir. 1 second. Okay, so Reb Shimon says the pasuk indicates to him that you need to accept all the prohibitions at once. V'rabbanan my time. What's the reason of the rabbis that if you accept a single prohibition, you become a Nazir? Amakra miyayin v'sheichar yazer. The pasuk before the pasuk that Reb Shimon brought, it says he makes a neder miyayin v'sheichar, from wine or from sheichars. Sheichar is typically a different type of drink. In this case, it's also a reference to wine, and we'll see more aged wine. Yeah. Okay. So the pasuk says miyayin v'sheichar yazer, from wine and from sheichar. But miyayin, the mem is often exclusionary. In other words, a mem removes something from the category. So miyayin v'sheichar means from the category of yayin v'sheichar, but not including the entire category. Okay. Reb Shimon nami haksiv miyayin v'sheichar yazer, and Reb Shimon as well. The pasuk says, in other words. So now the question is, what do the Reb Shimon do about what do the Rabbanan do about Reb Shimon's pasuk? What does Reb Shimon do about the Rabbanan's pasuk? So Reb Shimon wants, the Gemara says, Reb Shimon nami haksiv miyayin v'sheichar. What does Reb Shimon do? The fact that the mem in front of yayin implies that if you prohibit yourself from only some wine, you still become a Nazir. Reb Shimon is of the opinion that this prohibits wine of a mitzvah just like regular wine. What does that mean? That means a Nazir is not allowed to make kiddush and havdalah. What's yayin of mitzvah? What's wine of a mitzvah? Kiddush havdalah. Kiddush and havdalah. 1 second. Okay. You remember the Taisus here. Okay. Now next Gemara we'll read with the implication of Taisus. I don't know how our scroll will translate the Gemara. I might do it a little differently. But with Taisus' opinion, this is how the next Gemara is read. So Gemara says, is it the case that Kiddush and Havdalah are something that you're obligated Mida Araisa to do on a cup of wine? No, you're not. So in other words, Kiddush and Havdalah are not, at least on a cup of wine, are not mitzvahs deraisa. They're not biblical mitzvahs, biblical commandments. So therefore, why do I need a pasuk to tell me that you can't make Kiddush and Havdalah? Why would I think you could make Kiddush and Havdalah? Kiddush and Havdalah on a cup of wine are not biblical commandments. So why would I need a biblical verse to tell me that Kiddush and Havdalah is the same like other drinking? Biblically, there's no difference anyway, because you don't need to make Kiddush and Havdalah in a cup of wine. So in other words, as a rhetorical question, is it the case that Kiddush and Havdalah on a cup of wine is a mitzvah deraisa? Obviously not. So Gemara says, Elak Yehudah Amar Rava. So Miyayin v'Sheicher is coming to tell me something else. This idea of Rava. The Amar Rava shvua sh'eshta. The guy makes a shvua that he will drink a glass of wine. Because of Amar Hareini Nazir. And then he says, I'm a Nazir, so now we can't drink the wine anymore. Asi Naziris Chayla al Shavua. The Naziris is valid on top of the Shavua. He's not allowed to drink a cup of wine. 1 second. Okay, so the idea of miyayin v'sheicher means that any type of wine, even the type of wine that he has committed to drinking, he's made a shavua, a promise to drink, even that wine is also included in the prohibition of Naziris. Okay. Now the question here is, so Rabbanan Nami, according to the rabbis, how do they know that a Nazir would work on top of a shvua? In other words, if a guy makes a commitment to drink a cup of wine, then he becomes a Nazir. He's not allowed to drink the glass of wine. The Rabbanan say this pasuk is coming to tell me that wine of a mitzvah is like wine of Rishos. 1 second. One second. Rabbanan Nami Hamibayla less or Yain Mitzvah Yain Rishos. Okay. 1 second. It means okay, it's the same category. According to the Rabbanan, how do we know that this would be true? That if a guy makes a commitment to drink wine, and then he becomes a Nazir, that he's not allowed to drink the wine. From that, so in other words, they say Miyayin is coming to tell me that you drink, that any type of wine that you prohibit makes you into a Nazir. So how do they know? How do they know this concept of Rav Shimon? So the Gemara says, they learn from the fact that it says yayin and shecher. Now, obviously, shecher we said is not a hard liquor. Shecher is also aged wine. It's really included in yayin. So what's added? What's added is that if a guy makes a commitment to drink wine and then he becomes a Nazir, he's still not allowed to drink it. Shema min otarti. We see here that both are true. The Gemara says, "Rav Shimon hayna taima tichsiv shecher." So, according to Rav Shimon, why does the verse say the word shecher? La'alufe shecher shecher lamikdash, to teach me about the word shecher that said with regard to somebody walking into the temple. You cannot walk into the Beis Hamikdash when you're intoxicated. When Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Kohanim, you can't drink wine when you're coming into the Beis Hamikdash. Magabi Nazir yayin hu delitzer. Just like with regard to Nazir, only wine is prohibited. Aval shar mashkin loy, but other forms of liquor are not prohibited. Af gabi mikdash nami yayin hu delitzer aval shar mashkin havashtakrim loy.
He can have a good beer before he goes in.
Correct. He can have a beer before he goes into the temple. Okay. Now this is different than the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. Tanya, we learned Rabbi Yehudah Aimer ochal dvela kilas. A guy eats a fig cake. Evidently, this type of fig cake is one that's been fermented, so there's a little bit of alcohol there. B'shosa dvash v'cholov. And he drinks honey and milk. Hold on, the honey and milk thing I think is also some sort of intoxicating beverage.
It says it's intoxicating in the sense that it dulls the mind to a certain degree. No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Seemed right.
I don't know. Okay. Okay. So again, so Reb Shimon says that Sheikhars used to teach me that the idea of when somebody goes into the Beis Hamikdash intoxicated, it needs to be specifically with wine. Okay, so what do we see until now? Let's briefly review this. According to Reb Shimon, you can if you have to make a neder from all prohibition, you have to make a standard nazir. You make a nazir just from one prohibition, you're not a valid nazir. You together on that?
Yeah.
The rabbis say no, even if it's a specific prohibition, that's fine as well. You still become a nazir. What's the sources? Shimon says, Mikol asher yasa, from any type of naziris, from any type of prohibition, meaning you don't become a nazir from any type of product of grape. You don't become a nazir until you prohibited with every type of grape. Meaning you need to accept the entire Naziris as a whole and not a specific prohibition. And the rabbi said, Miyayin v'sheicher yazer, from wine and aged wine, he becomes prohibited. Meaning even if the prohibition is only some items. Okay. Another possibility is, okay, now and the Gemara wanted to know what Reb Shimon does with the pasuk of Yayin of Miyayin v'sheicher. In other words, what does Reb Shimon use that pasuk for? And we said he used the pasuk to tell me that if he makes a promise to drink wine and then he becomes a nazir, he's by his naziras he has to violate his shvur, his promise. So he does not drink the cup of wine. Another possibility is he buys saying Reb Shimon Leslie Israkal Lisser. Reb Shimon is of the opinion that a prohibition cannot come onto another prohibition. We'll explain. The Tanya we learn. Shimon Aimer, Ha'echel nevela b'yom kippurim potter. Shimon says if somebody eats an animal that wasn't properly slaughtered, he eats non-kosher meat in Yom Kippur, he's exempt. Why? Because the prohibition of Yom Kippur isn't relevant to non-kosher food, because non-kosher foods are already prohibited. So therefore, one second. Okay, so there as follows. One second. Okay, so according to Reb Shimon now, the pasuk come and tell me something else. Where a guy says, I'm not going to drink, he makes a commitment. He makes a shvur that I'm not going to drink this glass of wine. I will not. And then he becomes a nazir. So if you hold ein iser chal iser, so then if he drinks the glass of wine, he's only obligated with one set of lashes. That's because he only violated the prohibition of his promise, because Nazir can't go ein iser chal iser, so Nazir can't go on top of the promise. Whereas now that Reb Shimon has this extra pasuk, it tells me that Nazir is a unique type of prohibition where iser is chal iser. I don't want to go too far into this, but in general, there is the concept of iser chal iser is a little bit more complicated than that. And there are types of, even though the standard opinion is that Isser ain't Isser Chal Isser, that once something's prohibited, other prohibitions do not go on top of it. But it depends on the type of Isser. If the Isser includes a wider category, or it's an Isser that's not dependent in type, it's dependent in time. For example, you take a non-kosher item, which is prohibition of the item, and then you take Yom Kippur, which is a prohibition of time. It's just one day of the year. It could be such a prohibition, everyone would agree that Isser Chal Isser, it would be a double violation. Shimon, according to this Gemara, holds that even that would not be a double violation. And therefore, Nazir would not be, theoretically, Nazir should not be a double violation. You should only get Malchus lashes one time. But the pasuk of Nazir comes to tell me that Nazir is unique in the sense that Nazir could be a double violation. Okay. So the Gemara asks, what do the rabbis do with the pasuk of Mikol Asher Yosem Gefen Yayin? Everything that comes from wine. Presumably that means you need to accept all the prohibitions of wine at once, and presumably all the rest of the prohibitions as well. In other words, you can't just prohibit you won't become a Nazir if you're just prohibited from Chartzen or Zag, from peels or skins. You need to accept everything together. So if you need to accept everything together, then how do they interpret the verse otherwise? So the Gemara says, Hasam liman ali sur nazir shemitztar from samza. Okay, it's a very interesting concept here. So we talk about the mikol asher yosem v'gefen yayin. Anything that comes out of wine is prohibited. So let's say you have 4 items. We have wine, we have grape juice, and we have seeds and peels. Okay, there's just a problem. There's a difference here. Seeds and peels are solids. You're going to consume them by eating them, whereas wine you're going to drink, right? Moreover, what happens if you take a piece of bread and you dip it in wine? It's a big piece of bread, it absorbs a full revius of wine. Now, is the measurement to incur the violation, is it a volume of eating or is it a volume of drinking? They're 2 different measurements. And what happens if a guy goes ahead, he measures out half an amount of wine, and then he pours in half a measurement of peels, and he drinks, eats the whole thing quickly. Is that considered eating or drinking or both? So the Rabbanan say Mikol Asher Yasa means that any combination works. So this is a unique form, a unique prohibition. I don't think this exists in anything else, where if you combine the drinking quantity with the eating quantity, half of each, you're going to incur a violation of Nazir. Shemitztar from Zamzeh, they can combine, because Mikol tells me they could be combined. And Reb Shimon less like Sir, Reb Shimon disagrees that such a concept is valid. He disagrees that you can combine things. Tanya Reb Shimon Aimer Kol Shu Lamakas the Amar Kazayas El in Korban. Reb Shimon says that the whole concept of an amount is only with regard to bringing a sacrifice if you ate the amount by mistake. But with regard to Malchus, the penalty is even for eating a minor amount. So it's never relevant to combine amounts because Nazir never has a korban. A korban only exists, if you remember from the previous Masechtas, and I think we spoke about it at length in Masechtas Yivamis, it's got to be chayve krisis. Chayve krisis b'shayig is the only item that has a korban chatos. Krisis means it has a penalty of death by God at a young age. Because Nazir is not in that category, Nazir does not have a korban. If you eat Nazir by mistake, there's no korban. And therefore, if there's no korban, the shear, the measurement of everything is always the smallest amount. And therefore, it's not relevant to combine shiurim because there's no needs. Okay, get to a little bit of an easier Gemara now. Hareini keshimshin. Somebody says Hareini keshimshin. I'm like Samson, Shimshon. Shimshon, remember, was a unique type of Nazir. And we'll learn more about his Naziris too. I think we'll address the question that Donna had asked on Wednesday. We'll get to it in a few minutes. Kiben Menayach, like the son of Menayach. Shimshon was the son of Menayach. Okay. So these 2 categories we'll see in the Gemara alone are not definitive. Why? Because there could be a person who is the son of Manoach, who's not Shimshon, the prophet. And there can be a person whose name is Shimshon that isn't a Nazir. So you'd have to add one of these three. Kibal Delilah, like the husband of Delilah. Delilah was the wife that eventually caused Shimon's downfall by seducing him in a very brutal manner. You can see there in Malachim, in Shoftim, sorry. Kamisha Akar Dalsis Aza, like the one who destroyed the pillars of Aza. That was his final act before he died. And Kamisha Nikru Plishtim Esainav, like the one who's the Plishtim, the Philistines, tore out his eyes, poked out his eyes, they blinded him. Hareza Nazir Shimshon. This is, if a person says one of these statements, he becomes a Nazir like the Nazir of Shimshon. And we'll see soon exactly how that's defined and what differences there are. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, Lamali Lamisni Kol Halei. Okay, again, I'm explaining this Gemara according to Tosfos' opinion, which is a very specific approach. Lamali Lamisni Kol Halein. Why does it need to list all these items? Gemara says Tzricha. Di Amar Hareini Keshimshon. If somebody says just I am like Shimshon, Havimina Shimshon Echrena, I would think that he's like any Shimshon that walks on the street, any person whose name is Samson, right? Kamash Malon Kebem Menach. He has to additionally say like the son of Menach and Kibal Delilah. If he says like the son of Menach, Havimina Ikadim Iskari Hachi. There are many people that are whose father's name is Menach. Kamash Malon Kibal Delilah Shenikro Pelishtim Esainav. Kamash Malon, according to Tosfos, you would need to say Shimshon Menach and one of the following three statements: either the husband of Delilah, the one who destroyed the pillars of Aza, or the one who the Pelishtim blinded. Shimshon and Menach alone is not sufficient to become a Nazir. Okay, Ma'be Nazir Olam Nazir Shimshon. Like we said, there are really three types of permanent Naziris. There's the simple type of Naziris is a Nazir La'olam. A Nazir Li'olam means that he's a Nazir forever. He's a standard Nazir, and he didn't specify an end date. That's a Nazir Li'olam. Then there are two unique categories of Nazir Olam, of permanent Naziris. One is called a Nazir Olam. The other one's called a Nazir Shimshon. A Nazir Olam has a unique feature that he's allowed to cut his hair. Who is an example of Nazir Olam? This is an example of Avshalom. Avshalom, the son of David, was a Nazir Olam. He was a permanent Nazir, but he was allowed to cut his hair every now and then, and we'll soon see in the Gemara more detail. A Nazir Shimshon is a Nazir like the prophet Shimshon, and Shimshon was a unique type of Nazir. He was not allowed to cut his hair, but he was allowed to become impure to dead bodies, and we'll explore that in the Gemara as well. Ma'be Nazir Olam and Nazir Shimshon. What's the difference between the two of them? Nazir Olam, a permanent Nazir, hichbid sarei make a batar. If his hair gets very long, he's allowed to cut it. And in order to do that, umevi shalosh behemis, he brings 3 sacrifices every time he cuts his hair. This is not because it's against the rules; he's allowed to. And we'll soon see the source of this seems to be a rabbinic tradition. Halach l'Moshe Sinai, that when he cuts his hair, he brings 3 sacrifices. Again, he's allowed to do this. V'im nitma, but if he becomes tamei, maybe karman toma, then he has to go through the purification process of a nazir. Nazir Shimshon. On the other hand, if a guy becomes a Nazir Shimshon, hechbet saroi, if his hair grows, eina mekel, he's not allowed to cut it. He has to grow his hair forever. V'nitma, but if it becomes tamei, eina mevi karban tuma, he does not he doesn't have to go through the purification process of a Nazir that became tamei. And we'll soon see in the Mishnah, actually, not only doesn't he have to, he's allowed to become tamei. So the Gemara has an obvious question here. We were just talking about Nazir Shimshon. And then all of a sudden he started bringing in Nazir Olam. Nazir Olam is a permanent Nazir, who has a different set of rules than Nazir Shimshon. Man Dechar Shmei, who brought it up. So the Gemara says, no. The Mishnah is missing words here. This is what the Mishnah meant to say.
I'm sorry, page position.
5 lines on the bottom of the page. First word of the line, Ha'omer.
Thank you.
Ha'omer Hareini Nazir Olam. If somebody says, I'm a Nazir Olam, a Nazir forever, Harez a Nazir, then that's a valid type of Naziris. Umabe Nazir Olam and Nazir Shimshon. What's the difference between these two categories? Nazir Olam, a permanent Nazir, hichbet sarei make a batar. If his hair gets too long, he's allowed to cut it. Umevi shalosh behemis, and he brings 3 sacrifices when he cuts his hair. But if he becomes tamei, maybe carbon tummy, he goes through the Nazir tamei purification process, which involves carbonis. However, Nazir Shimshon, the guy is a Nazir like Shimshon, hechbet sauri ena make up a tower. If his hair grows long, he's not permitted to cut it. Ena make up a tower, ena maybe carbon tumma, and he does not purify himself if he becomes tummy. So now the Gemara asks, carbon who delamaisi, presumably the Mishnah is implying that you don't bring a sacrifice. Avon Nazirus Chalala, but he obviously is a Nazir Shimshon. In other words, the Mishnah here is clearly identifying the concept of a Nazir Shimshon exists. There's a type of Nazirus called a Nazir Shimshon, which allows you to become Tomei. The Gemara says, Mani Masnisin, who is our Mishnah like? Lo Rabbi Yehudah, v'lo Rabbi Shimon. It's not like Rabbi Yehudah, and it's not like Rabbi Shimon. Why is this? The Tanya we learn. Rabbi Yehudah says Nazir Shimshon mutarli tavel ametzim. Rabbi Yehudah says a Nazir Shimshon is permitted to become Tomei. Our Mishnah seems to imply that if he becomes Tomei, then he doesn't have to bring a sacrifice. But presumably he's not allowed to become Tomei. 1 second. Nazir Shimshon mutarli tavel ametzim. She came at Sina b'Shimshon shenitma, because we find that the prophet Shimshon was a judge, a prophet. He also became Tomei. Reb Shimon says, Nazir Shimshon le'amar klum. There is no such thing as a Nazir Shimshon. One cannot accept a Naziris to be like Shimshon. And why is that? Because Shimshon never accepted Naziris. Who accepted Naziris on his behalf? A Malach, an angel. An angel told his father, this is the Haftarah for Parsha of Nazir. And his father was told by the prophet, your son will be a Nazir. And we don't find that Shimshon ever said it, or Menach, his father, ever said it. And therefore, there's no such thing as a Nazir Shimshon. It was a unique exception. Okay, so the Gemara says, Mani, who is our Mishnah like? Rabbi Yehudah, if it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah, ha'amar fi lechatchila. Rabbi Yehudah says that even lechatchila, in other words, a Nazir Shimshon is permitted to become Tomei. And our Mishnah implies that only if he became Tomei, but he's not allowed to become Tomei, if he wants to. If he becomes Tomei, not that it's not permitted otherwise. If it's the opinion of Shimon, Nazir klal. Shimshon says there's no such thing as a Nazir Shimshon. So Gemara says, the truth is we're going with the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. One second. Again, since we said with regard to a permanent Nazir, if he becomes Tameh, because obviously a Nazir Olam like the Nazir of Avshalom is not allowed to become Tameh. If he does needs to purify, so we use the word if he becomes Tameh, because he's not allowed to. So therefore we use a similar terminology by Nazir Shimshon as well. Tanei Gabi Nazir Shimshon in Nitma. But of course the Nazir Shimshon is not only if he becomes Tameh, he doesn't have to bring sacrifices, he doesn't have to purify himself, but he's allowed to become Tameh if he wants to as well. The Gemara says, let's say it's a debate of these opinions. Tanan we learned. Hold on. Let's say it's a debate of these opinions. The Tanan we learned. Hold on a second. Okay, hold on a second. Okay. Oh, times 650. Okay. Let's say the debate is with regard to. Let's say the debate between Rabbi Yehudah and Rabbi Shimon is similar to this debate. We'll see what's the debate. It's not. Harei like a bechor. Guy says. So we learned in the concept of Nedorim that a person can do hatfasa. A could say this item is prohibited like this item, right? So let's say a guy says like a bechor. What's a bechor? A firstborn animal. The halacha is that animal has to be brought as a sacrifice. Okay. Now what's the problem there? The problem is that by nature, if you have animals that have a firstborn, the animal necessarily becomes a sacrifice. Because it necessarily becomes a sacrifice, so nobody sanctified it. Remember, the key idea in Hatfasa was dover hanodor. You need to do something that was sanctified, where a person created the sanctification. Sorry?
The animals is auto sanctification.
There you go. God sanctified. So I really like a bechor. Somebody says this tissue box should be like a bechor. Yaakov Oyster. Yaakov says it's prohibited. Rabbi Yossi Mater. Rabbi Yossi says it's permitted. My love. Rabbi Yehudah Sover law Kurv Yaakov. Rabbi Yehudah says that you can become a Nazir Shimshon even though Shimshon never accepted Naziris because he holds you don't need to have a Dover Hanodor. And similarly, the fact that Shimshon never accepted Naziris doesn't mean you can't become like Shimshon. The Amar Loi Be'in Dover Hanodor that says you don't need a Dover Hanodor. Rabbi Shimon says like Rabbi Yossi, the Amar Be'in Dover Hanodor. And Rabbi Shimon says like Rabbi Yossi, you need a Dover Hanodor. And since Shimshon never accepted Naziris, you can't become a Nazir Shimshon. Sort of, in other words, because becoming a Nazir Shimshon is sort of accepting Shimshon's Naziris. And the question is whether Shimshon's Naziris is a Dover Hanodor or not. The Gemara says no. Loi the Kul Amar Be'in Dover Hanodor. Everyone agrees that you need a Dover Hanodor. And the question is whether the concept of a Nazir Shimshon exists. And with regard to Bechor, everyone agrees also you need a Dover Hanodor. The question is Bechor a Dover Hanodor? The verse says Bechor is to God, Lashem. That comes to include, it says when a person makes a neder, he makes a neder Lashem, to God. What does it mean to God? It includes the thing that's to God. What else is called Bechor Lashem? What else is called Lashem? A Bechor. Why? Because the verse says Kol HaBechor Takdish Lashem. Find the same terminology there, Lashem. So the Lashem of Nedorim includes a Bechor, which the verse also says Lashem to God. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yossi says no. Ahu Lashem ibayle l'Rabbis Chadas v'Alshem. That the Lashem of Nedorim comes to tell me that you can be matfis with a korban like Chatas and Asham, which is sanctified, unlike Bechor, which is not sanctified. Why are you saying you can do hatfasa by connecting the item you want to prohibit to a sacrifice, such as Chatas and Asham? Which is interesting, because Chatas and Asham, while you do need to separate it, there's a difference there. Because Chatas and Asham, you need a cause to bring it. You can't just bring a Chatas and Asham, you have to have a sin to bring it. So in a certain sense, it's also less of a Dover Hanodor. A korban oila, out of the goodness of my heart, I decided to bring a korban oila. So therefore, that's entirely a Dover Hanodor. Whereas Chatas and Asham is not entirely a Dover Hanodor, because you need to sin to be able to be obligated to be able to separate it, Chatas and Asham. So Rabbi Yossi is saying is that Chatas and Asham are also considered a Dover Hanodor. Why did you prefer Chatas and Asham over Bechor? And to exempt Bechor, I'm going to include Chatas and Asham because in order to create them, you need to separate them as sacrifices. But I'm going to exempt Bechor because Bechor, God is the one who sanctified. Rabbi Yaakov would argue back. Bechor also you have to separate. Now, even though it's naturally automatically sanctified, but we do find the Tanya Shabbat Rabbeinu Amru. We find in the house of Rebbe they would teach. How do we know that somebody who has a Bechor born in his flock, that he has a mitzvah to sanctify it, he's commanded to sanctify it? You have to sanctify it. And because you have to sanctify it, therefore there's also some idea of it being a Dover Hanodor. So Rabbi Yossi would counter and saying, Nehi the mitzvah like Dishay, the truth is, even though you're right that you're supposed to sanctify it, Eloi Makdish Lei, let's say you didn't, Miloi Kodesh. Is it not sanctified? It is sanctified, because it's really not up to you. It's a mitzvah for you to say out the words, but your words don't actually accomplish anything. And therefore, I'd prefer to include Chatas and Asham, which are sanctified. Okay. Let's continue a couple more lines. Gabi Nazir Nami Haksiv Lashem. With regard to Nazir, it also says Lashem. So what's the Lashem of Nazir teaching you? Become a Nazir Lashem. What does Lashem mean? So the Gemara says Lashem of Nazir comes to teach me this idea. And the idea in a nutshell, the Gemara will give a story, but the idea in a nutshell is that a person should only become a Nazir if his heart is truly with Hashem. And as Taisa says, unfortunately, this is a reality that we all live with. We just have it in a slightly different version. Unfortunately, the reality is, why do people accept Nazir? Because somebody in the family is ill, because somebody's going through a tragedy, because he wants to succeed in a new business venture. So he says I'm becoming a Nazir, but he's not serious. And then when he becomes Tameh, he regrets the whole thing. And if he regrets the whole thing, it could be he really should nullify his neder, and he shouldn't finish it. He should get the whole thing nullified. And therefore, because there's a possibility that he doesn't get that he regrets it but doesn't get it nullified, there's a possibility that all his sacrifices are really not valid because he's not really a Nazir. Except if a Nazir is really sincerely Lashem. What's an example of a Nazir Lashem? Look at the Tanya, like we learned the following story. Amr Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik said, I never ate from the sacrifice of somebody who became Tameh while he was a Nazir. One person, Shaboy Min Adoram, he came from the south. Yifei Enayim B'toiv Roi. He was a beautiful person. His hair was gorgeous, very attractive person, very attractive male. I said to him, Beni, my son, you can go model. Why exactly are you destroying all your hair now by becoming a Nazir? And now you're cutting, the whole thing is coming off. Every single bit of hair. He said to me, I was a shepherd. I went to take out water, to draw water for the animals. From a well. I saw my reflection in the water. And my Yetzer Hara basically said, go model, go become a movie actor. And it was gonna cause me to sin, presumably with women. I said to my evil inclination, Reiko, empty person. Why should I be boastful of a world that isn't mine? Because the end of all beauty is buried. The proper way to behave now is I'm going to serve God by cutting off this hair. And immediately I committed to becoming a Nazir. So all the hair and my beautiful looks all eventually were going into a pot of boiling water and were destroyed. They went underneath a pot of boiling water. They're burnt. So Amati, I got up and Ashaktiv al Roshi. I gave him a kiss on his head. Amartila, and I said to him, Kamoischa Yerba Nazirim B'Yisrael. Nazirim like you should increase. This is what the verse said. Ish ki yafli linder neder nazir lahazir lashem. A person accepts a neder of nazir to serve Hashem. And this is this guy was someone who was so committed that Shimon HaTzadik felt that even though he became Tameh, there's no reason to presume he wasn't serious in his neder to become a nazir. Whereas anybody else who becomes Tameh, there is reason to question their seriousness, and because you're questioning their seriousness, therefore their sacrifices may not be valid. Okay, have a great day.